Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we're diving into one of archaeology's most persistent mysteries. As always, let me know where in the world you're listening from. Get cozy, settle in, and let's begin. Across the rugged mountains, sun-drenched valleys, and island-dotted coastlines of Greece, the landscape whispers with the voices of the past. Every traveler who ventures through this ancient land encounters the familiar names. Athens, rising on its sacred rock, where democracy was born and philosophy flourished. Sparta, legendary home of warriors whose discipline shaped empires. Corinth, strategic gateway between seas, where traders and travelers crossed paths for millennia. Thebes, city of tragic kings and heroic legends, its very name heavy with myth and memory. These cities stand verified by stone and soil. Archaeologists have walked their streets, measured their temples, and catalogued their treasures. Museums across the world display their pottery, their sculpture, their tools of daily life. We know these cities existed because we can touch what remains of them. The evidence is tangible, undeniable, preserved in layers of earth and fragments of marble. But scattered through the pages of ancient texts, another category of place appears. Cities described with equal confidence, equal detail, by some of the most careful observers the ancient world produced. Towns mentioned in passing by Homer, whose geographic knowledge spanned the known world. Settlements catalogued by Herodotus, the father of history, who traveled extensively and recorded what he saw. Communities mapped by Strabo, the meticulous geographer whose 17-volume work attempted to describe the entire inhabited Earth. Sites noted by Pausanias, the 2nd century traveler whose descriptions of Greece have guided archaeologists for generations. These writers did not deal in fantasy. They were describing the world they knew, the world they walked through. When Pausanias wrote about a temple, archaeologists have found that temple. When Strabo described a harbour, that harbour has been located. Their accuracy has been proven again and again. They were reliable witnesses to their time. Yet some of the places they mention have never been found. Not abandoned ruins, slowly reclaimed by nature but still visible to those who search. Not buried cities, hidden beneath centuries of accumulated soil, waiting for the right excavation to reveal them, but completely absent from the archaeological record, as though the words on the page, carefully preserved through copying and recopying over millennia, are all that remain, as though the cities themselves dissolved into air, leaving only their names behind. For modern archaeologists, these missing cities represent a peculiar kind of challenge. They are not searching for something unknown. They have descriptions, sometimes detailed ones. They have approximate locations, references to nearby landmarks, mentions in multiple independent sources. They know these places should exist, or should have existed. The question is where and what happened to make them vanish so completely. The search techniques have evolved dramatically over the past century. In the early days of classical archaeology, scholars walked the countryside with ancient texts in hand, trying to match descriptions to landscape. They looked for telltale signs. Unusual mounds in otherwise flat terrain, scattered pottery fragments weathering out of hillsides, local place names that echoed ancient words, stone building blocks reused in Byzantine churches or Ottoman fortifications. These surface clues led to some spectacular discoveries. Heinrich Schliemann excavated what proved to be Troy at Helice in Turkey, though the site had already been identified by Frank Calvert, a local English archaeologist who lacked the funds to excavate it himself. Schliemann's work, while groundbreaking, benefited from following Calvert's insights combined with references in Homer's epics. Carl Blegen located Nestor's palace at Pylos using similar methods, combining ancient descriptions with careful observation of the land, but other cities proved more elusive. Some locations were searched repeatedly by multiple expeditions, with nothing to show for the effort. Others were identified tentatively, then disputed, then re-identified elsewhere, creating a confusing tangle of possible and impossible locations that archaeologists still debate. Modern technology has added new tools to the search. Aerial photography reveals patterns invisible from ground level. Ancient field systems, buried roads, the ghostly outlines of long-vanished walls. Satellite imagery penetrates vegetation and can sometimes detect subtle differences in soil composition that indicate human activity beneath the surface. Ground-penetrating radar maps subsurface structures without breaking ground. LiDAR technology, using laser pulses to measure topography with extraordinary precision, strips away the visual clutter of modern landscape to reveal ancient modifications of the Earth itself. These technologies have led to remarkable discoveries. Entire cities, unknown to history, detected from the air. Settlements hidden beneath rainforest canopy, their stone foundations finally visible through gaps in the trees. Urban networks far more extensive than anyone imagined, revealed by patterns of subtle differences in crop growth. Yet still, some of the cities mentioned in ancient texts remain stubbornly absent from every survey and scan. The more archaeologists search, the more puzzling their absence becomes. These were not insignificant villages, forgotten because they were small and unremarkable. They were places important enough to mention in works meant to record significant geography, memorable enough to warrant description, substantial enough to be named alongside cities we have found. What happened to them? The possibilities multiply the more one considers the question. Perhaps they were destroyed so completely that no trace remains. Earthquakes can level buildings and scatter their stones. Tsunamis can erase coastal settlements, drowning them beneath sediment and sea. Warfare can reduce proud cities to rubble, which time and weather gradually disperse. Human activity itself can be remarkably thorough in erasing evidence of earlier habitation. Later builders quarry ancient ruins for ready-made stone. Farmers level mounds to create fields. Rivers change course, burying settlements beneath new floodplains or washing them away entirely. Or perhaps these cities still exist. But we're looking in the wrong places. Ancient sources can be maddeningly imprecise about distance and direction. A settlement described as near another known location might be 5 miles away or 50. A city said to be on the coast might have been inland when sea levels were lower, or might now be underwater if sea levels rose. Identifications based on place names can be misleading. Many names were reused or shifted from one location to another as populations moved. The Pylos that Homer described might not be the same Pylos that Strabo visited. Different cities, sharing a name, separated by centuries. Then there's the possibility that makes some archaeologists uncomfortable. Perhaps these places never existed at all. Not as physical cities, but as errors in transmission, misunderstandings, or deliberate inventions. Ancient texts were copied and recopied by scribes who sometimes made mistakes. Names could be garbled, locations confused. An author might repeat information from earlier sources without verifying it personally, or, in rare cases, might invent details to fill gaps in knowledge, creating plausible-sounding descriptions of places they'd never actually seen. But that explanation fits uncomfortably with what we know about our ancient sources. Writers like Pausanias and Strabo were generally careful. They distinguished between what they had seen personally and what they had learned from others. They acknowledged uncertainty when they felt it. They were not fabricating their accounts from whole cloth. So the mystery persists. Across Greece, beneath olive groves and wheat fields, under the surface of inland lakes and the waters of the Aegean, hidden in valleys accessible only by difficult mountain paths, there may still be cities waiting to be found. Cities that ancient travelers saw and described. Cities that once had temples and marketplaces, harbors and walls. Citizens who lived and died and left behind the ordinary debris of human existence. Or perhaps they're already gone, erased so thoroughly that all the technology in the world will never recover them, leaving only the ancient texts as tombstones, marking places that once were, but are no more. Let's explore some of the most intriguing of these phantom cities, beginning with one whose destruction was so dramatic, so complete, that ancient writers compared it to Atlantis. On a winter night in 373 BC, according to ancient accounts, the earth beneath the city of Helice began to shake. The sources describe what happened next with dramatic detail, though modern scholars debate how literally to interpret these accounts. What seems clear is that a significant disaster struck this important city, and understanding what actually happened has occupied researchers for decades. Helice stood on the southern shore of the Gulf of Corinth, in the region known as Achaea. This was no minor settlement. The city served as the principal center of the Achaean League, a confederation of Greek states that wielded considerable political influence in the region. It was home to an important sanctuary of Poseidon, a religious site that drew pilgrims from across the Greek world. In the competitive landscape of ancient Greek politics, Helice held a position of unusual prominence for a city of its size. Ancient writers, particularly those from the Roman period, describe the disaster in apocalyptic terms. Strabo, writing in the 1st century BC, reported that an earthquake caused the ground beneath Helice to liquefy and subside, and that a tsunami from the Gulf swept over the city. The accounts speak of complete destruction, of a city that vanished overnight, swallowed by the earth and covered by the sea. Later, visitors to the area claimed they could see ruins beneath the water, including what appeared to be a bronze statue of Poseidon still standing in its submerged sanctuary. These dramatic accounts captured imaginations for centuries. Plato, writing within decades of the event, may have drawn inspiration from Helice's fate when crafting his story of Atlantis, another prosperous city destroyed in a single day and night. The parallel between the two disasters, one mythical and one apparently historical, was not lost on ancient readers or modern scholars. For 2,000 years, Helice remained lost. The ancient descriptions placed it near the modern town of Aigion, somewhere along the coast or just offshore in the Gulf of Corinth. But attempts to locate the city by searching the seabed turned up nothing. The ruins that ancient travelers claimed to see had apparently vanished completely, perhaps buried under centuries of marine sediment, perhaps destroyed by subsequent earthquakes and erosion. Then, in 1988, archaeologist Dora Katsonopoulou launched what became known as the Helice project, a systematic effort to locate the lost city. Her team took a different approach. Rather than searching underwater, they investigated the coastal plain near where ancient sources suggested Helice had been. Using geophysical survey, drilling, and eventually excavation, they made a remarkable discovery. The city was not underwater, at least not anymore. Over the centuries since its destruction, geological processes had been at work. Sediment from rivers had accumulated. The former seabed or lagoon had filled in and risen. What was once beneath water had become dry land again. Beginning in 2001, excavations began revealing the remains of ancient Helice, buried under meters of earth in what are now olive groves and fields. What the excavators found was complex and in some ways contradictory. They uncovered evidence of a substantial ancient settlement with occupation layers spanning from the Bronze Age through the Classical period and beyond. They found destruction layers that could be associated with seismic events. They identified remains that appeared to have been damaged by earthquake and perhaps by water action. But they also found evidence that challenged the ancient accounts of total catastrophic destruction. Most significantly, they discovered that Helice had been repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt over its long history. This wasn't a city destroyed once and abandoned forever. This was a place that experienced major earthquakes roughly every 300 years, according to recent research published in 2025. Each time the inhabitants dealt with the disaster, often relocating their settlement slightly and rebuilding. The Bronze Age town had been destroyed around 2100 BC by an earthquake that caused significant ground subsidence. Later communities rebuilt on nearby higher ground. The Classical period city, the one supposedly destroyed in 373 BC, shows evidence of damage consistent with an earthquake. But researchers have also found coins minted by Helice decades after 373 BC, suggesting the city continued to exist in some form after the purported catastrophe. A new settlement arose in the western part of the plain shortly after the event, indicating that, while the disaster was severe, it wasn't necessarily the complete annihilation that later Roman writers described. This has led some scholars to argue that the traditional story of Helice's destruction may have been exaggerated over time. A 2022 study suggested that the catastrophic accounts might have been embellished in Roman times, influenced by local legends and religious interpretations that saw the disaster as divine punishment. These researchers point out that what might have been a serious earthquake and localized flooding could have been transformed into a legendary tale of total destruction as the story was retold over centuries. Other scholars maintain that the 373 BC event was indeed catastrophic, even if some exaggeration crept into later retellings. They point to the destruction layers found in excavation, the evidence of tsunami action in some areas, and the clear disruption in the site's occupation pattern. The truth, as often happens in archaeology, likely lies somewhere between the extremes. A major disaster occurred. It severely damaged the city. Many people died or fled. But the settlement was eventually reoccupied, rebuilt on safer ground, and continued into Hellenistic and Roman times. What's undeniable is that Helice, whether or not it was destroyed exactly as ancient sources claimed, did become lost to knowledge. For 2 millennia, no one knew precisely where it had been. The rediscovery of the site, buried beneath fields rather than beneath the sea, represents a remarkable archaeological achievement. It demonstrates how geological processes can completely transform a landscape over centuries, turning seabeds into farmland, hiding cities beneath accumulated sediment, making the geography described in ancient texts almost unrecognizable today. The ongoing research at Helice continues to refine understanding of what happened in 373 BC and how ancient communities responded to environmental disasters. The site has become a case study in resilience, showing how people adapted to living in a seismically dangerous region, how they rebuilt after disasters, how they modified their construction techniques to better withstand earthquakes. These lessons from the ancient past may have relevance for modern communities facing similar environmental challenges. But Helice's story also serves as a reminder of how cities can be lost, how quickly disasters can strike, and how thoroughly time and nature can obscure even important urban centers. If Helice, frequently mentioned in ancient texts, the capital of a major league, the home of an important sanctuary, could vanish so completely that its location became uncertain, what other cities might be similarly hidden, waiting beneath the fields and hills of Greece? Some of the most frustrating mysteries in Greek archaeology involve cities that have been found, but perhaps not the right ones. Ancient sources describe these places with confidence. Modern archaeologists have located impressive ruins at sites that match some of the descriptions. Yet scholarly debate continues about whether these are actually the cities the ancient writers meant, or different settlements that happen to share the same name. Consider Iolcus, the city from which Jason and the Argonauts supposedly sailed on their quest for the Golden Fleece. This is one of the most famous cities in Greek mythology. Homer mentions it in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, describing it as well-built and prosperous. Other ancient sources locate it in Thessaly, on the shores of the Pagasetic Gulf, at the foot of Mount Pelion. The myth tells us it was the home of the tyrant Pelios, who sent Jason on his quest. It was the assembly point for Greece's greatest heroes before they embarked on their legendary voyage. In the late 19th century, excavations near the modern city of Volos began turning up impressive Mycenaean remains. Tholos tombs, the beehive-shaped burial chambers characteristic of Bronze Age Greek royalty. Pottery and artifacts suggesting a wealthy, important settlement. The location seemed to match reasonably well with ancient descriptions, though the fit wasn't perfect. The site became identified as Iolcus, based on this combination of archaeology and geography. Tour guides tell visitors this is where the Argonauts began their journey. Museum labels present it with confidence, yet some archaeologists remain unconvinced, or at least cautious about claiming certainty. The remains at the Dimini/Volos area are substantial, but not as spectacular as one might expect for a city of Iolcus's legendary importance. No palace has been found comparable to those at Mycenae or Pylos, though this doesn't necessarily mean one didn't exist. It might simply not have been located yet, or might have been destroyed or built over in later periods. The site's importance seems to have declined by the classical period, when most of our textual sources were written, raising questions about whether later writers were describing this specific settlement or preserving older traditions about a place they had never actually seen. The ancient sources themselves add to the confusion. Strabo, writing in the 1st century BC, notes that by his time Iolcus had long been in ruins, its inhabitants relocated to the new city of Demetrius, founded nearby in 294 BC. He gives distances and directions that don't quite match the site at Volos perfectly, though ancient measurements and directions are notoriously imprecise. Other ancient writers are vague about specifics, referring to the city's legendary past without providing the kind of detailed contemporary description that would help pin down its location with certainty. So we have a site that could be Iolcus, that probably is, based on the available evidence of geography, Bronze Age occupation, and the general fit with ancient descriptions. Most scholars accept this identification as the best available hypothesis, but absolute certainty remains elusive. If we're wrong, if the real Iolcus lies somewhere else in the region still unexcavated, then one of Greek mythology's most important cities remains undiscovered, despite decades of searching in what seems like the right area. The problem intensifies with Pylos, the city of Nestor, the wise old king who advised the Greeks during the Trojan War. Homer describes Pylos vividly in the Odyssey. When Telemachus arrives searching for news of his father, Odysseus, he finds a prosperous kingdom with a magnificent palace. The palace has a great hall with a central hearth, storage rooms, guest chambers, workshops. The description is specific enough that archaeologists felt confident they could identify the site if they found it. In 1939, Carl Blegen did find what appeared to be exactly such a palace. Near the modern village of Chora in Mycenae, on a hilltop called Ano Englianos, overlooking the coastal plain, excavations revealed an extraordinary Bronze Age complex. The Palace of Nestor, as it came to be known, is the best preserved Mycenaean palace in Greece. Its layout matches Homer's description remarkably well. The central hall with its circular hearth, the throne room, the storage areas filled with pithoi, large storage jars, even a bathtub, like the one where Nestor's daughter Polycaste supposedly bathed Telemachus in the poem. More convincingly, the site produced over 1,100 clay tablets inscribed with Linear B script, the earliest form of written Greek. When these tablets were deciphered in the 1950s by Michael Ventris and John Chadwick, they revealed administrative records of a Bronze Age palace. And crucially, the tablets gave the Mycenaean name for this place, Puro or Pylos. The inhabitants themselves called their city Pylos. They kept detailed records here of their kingdom's administration, documenting shipments of goods, religious offerings, personnel assignments. Archaeologists had found not just any palace, but one explicitly named Pylos in contemporary Bronze Age documents. For most scholars, this settled the matter. The palace at Chora is Nestor's Pylos, or at least a Pylos important enough to be remembered in later legend. The combination of archaeology, Linear B evidence, and general geographic fit with Homeric descriptions makes this the most convincing identification. Except there's a complicating factor. The ancient sources mention multiple places called Pylos. Strabo specifically states there were 3 different cities of that name in the Peloponnese. One in Helice, one in Triphylia, and one in Mycenae. All 3, according to local traditions recorded in antiquity, claim to be Homer's Pylos, the city of Nestor. Each could point to some features that seem to match details in the Homeric poems. Each had supporters among ancient scholars who argued for their particular city as the real one. Which one did Homer actually mean? The palace at Chora is in Mycenae, which makes it a strong candidate and the one most widely accepted today. But some scholars note potential problems. The catalogue of ships in the Iliad lists various places under Nestor's control, and not all of them are easily accessible from Chora. The distances and travel times mentioned in the Odyssey, while notoriously difficult to calculate from poetic descriptions, create some puzzles for reconstructions of Telemachus's journey if we place Nestor's palace at Chora. Homer's Pylos is described as sandy. And while scholars debate what exactly this epithet means, some have argued it fits other locations better. So even with an excellent archaeological site, with dramatic ruins and confirming Linear B tablets showing this was indeed a place called Pylos in the Bronze Age, a degree of uncertainty remains. Is the Palace of Nestor really Nestor's palace? Or is it simply a Pylos, and Homer was describing a different Pylos that still waits to be found? The debate continues, though most archaeologists and classicists accept Chora as the best available candidate. The evidence strongly supports this identification, even if absolute certainty remains technically out of reach, as it often does when trying to connect legendary narratives to archaeological remains. This pattern repeats across Greece with other cities mentioned in ancient sources. Multiple sites claim to be the true location of legendary places. Each has some evidence in its favor. Each has problems that argue against identification. Archaeologists excavate remains that are impressive and important in their own right, but may or may not be the specific city that ancient writers were describing. The fundamental difficulty is that place names were not unique in the ancient world. Modern states enforce uniqueness. Two cities in the same country cannot legally have identical names, or if they do, they're distinguished by additional information. Athens, Georgia versus Athens, Greece. Portland, Maine versus Portland, Oregon. The system prevents confusion. Ancient Greece had no such system. Cities were independent entities that chose their own names. If colonists from one city founded a settlement elsewhere, they often gave it the same name as their home city, or they used the name of a mythological founder, and multiple cities might claim the same legendary figure. The result was that many places shared names with many other places. Only local context, references to nearby features, or explicit clarification by the writer distinguished them. When those contextual clues are missing or ambiguous, when the nearby features have changed or can no longer be identified, when writers in later periods simply copied information from earlier sources without checking it themselves, the result is the situation archaeologists face now. Impressive ruins that might be the city we're looking for, or might be a different city entirely, with no certain way to tell. The technology that has been so helpful in locating buried sites cannot solve this particular problem. Ground-penetrating radar will find buried structures, but it cannot read the signs that might have identified which city those structures belonged to. Satellite imagery reveals ancient settlement patterns, but it cannot provide the names of those settlements. Only inscriptions, texts, coins, or other explicit identifiers can do that. And many sites lack such evidence, or it hasn't been found yet. So the search continues, at multiple levels. Archaeologists excavate known sites, hoping to find that crucial inscription or document that will confirm identification beyond doubt. They survey unexplored regions, looking for alternative sites that might prove to be the real city. They argue over interpretations of ancient texts, trying to extract more precise geographical information from deliberately vague or poetic descriptions. And in the meantime, visitors walk through the Palace of Nestor, standing in rooms where Bronze Age royalty lived and worked, knowing this was Pylos, but not knowing with complete certainty whether it was Homer's Pylos. The uncertainty adds a layer of mystery to ruins that are mysterious enough already. The Argolid Peninsula in the northeastern Peloponnese is one of the most thoroughly excavated regions in Greece. Its Bronze Age citadels, Mycenae and Tiryns especially, have been studied for over a century. Their massive walls, their sophisticated architecture, their rich burials have made them centerpieces of Mycenaean archaeology. This was clearly a region of great power and prosperity in the late Bronze Age, roughly 1600 to 1100 BC. When Heinrich Schliemann began excavating at Mycenae in 1876, using dynamite to blast through layers of earth in his quest for Homeric treasures, he opened a window into a civilization that had been lost for 3,000 years. The golden mask he believed belonged to Agamemnon, though actually centuries older than that legendary king, became an icon of Greek archaeology. The massive Lion Gate, the shaft graves filled with gold and weapons, the Cyclopean walls built from stones so large that later Greeks believed only giants could have moved them, all revealed the power and sophistication of Mycenaean Greece. But Mycenae was not alone. Ancient sources describe many other cities in this same region, not just Mycenae and Tiryns, but numerous smaller settlements, each with its own name, its own identity, its own role in the political landscape. Homer's catalogue of ships in the Iliad lists cities that contributed forces to the expedition against Troy. For the Argolid alone, he names more than a dozen places. Later writers add others. Pausanias, traveling through the region in the 2nd century AD, mentions ruins and traditions about settlements that were already ancient in his time. The Mycenaean civilization that dominated this region was remarkably urbanized for its time. Recent surveys have revealed a densely populated landscape, with settlements clustered particularly thickly in the fertile plains and along routes connecting the major centers. These weren't isolated citadels ruling empty countryside. This was a complex political geography of major palaces, secondary centers, towns, and villages, all connected through networks of roads and trade relationships that can still be traced in the archaeological record. Linear B tablets, those earliest examples of written Greek baked into permanence by the fires that destroyed the palaces, give us glimpses of this administrative complexity. They record places, officials, agricultural products, craftsmen, religious offerings. Some of the places named on these tablets have been identified. Others remain mysterious, known only from these brief mentions in bureaucratic documents. Some of these Argolid cities have been identified through careful archaeological work. Argos itself, the major classical period city, sits on top of its Bronze Age predecessor, making deep excavation difficult, but confirming continuous occupation from Mycenaean times through to the present day. The modern city, built over millennia of earlier occupation, preserves the site but also makes comprehensive excavation impossible. What lies beneath the houses and streets of modern Argos may never be fully known. Mycenae, mentioned by Homer, has been located and partially excavated on a hilltop a few miles east of Mycenae. The site revealed substantial fortifications built with the same Cyclopean masonry technique used at the major citadels, and evidence of elite occupation, including rich chamber tombs. Mycenae was clearly a significant center in its own right, not merely a satellite of Mycenae. The discovery of linear B tablets at the site confirms its administrative importance and connects it to the wider palatial network. Prosimna, another Homeric site, has been identified with ruins near Mycenae, where excavations revealed an extensive cemetery with chamber tombs spanning several centuries of the late Bronze Age. The quality and quantity of these tombs indicate a prosperous community, though the settlement itself has proven more elusive. This pattern is common in Mycenaean archaeology. Tombs are easier to find than settlements because they were built more substantially and were often located in prominent positions. But identifying the community that created those tombs, finding its houses and workshops and public spaces, can be surprisingly difficult. But others remain stubbornly missing. Places named in the ancient sources, sometimes described in detail, that should exist somewhere in this relatively small region, but have never been convincingly found. The challenges in locating these missing cities are multiple and interconnected, each complicating the already difficult work of archaeological prospection. Consider Arcina. Ancient sources describe it as a coastal town in the eastern Argolid, important enough to send ships to Troy. Pausanias mentions visiting its ruins, which in his time included remnants of walls and a temple to Apollo. The town had a dramatic history. It was destroyed by Argos in the 8th century BC. During a period of aggressive expansion by that city, its population driven into exile. Survivors eventually founded a new city, also called Asine, on the coast of Mycenae far to the west. But the original Asine, the one that sent warriors to Troy, the one whose ruins Pausanias saw, should still be locatable somewhere on the eastern coast of the Argolid. Archaeologists believe they've found it. A site near the modern town of Tolo, excavated by Swedish archaeologists beginning in the 1920s, has revealed Bronze Age and early Iron Age remains consistent with the ancient descriptions. The location matches reasonably well with what can be gleaned from ancient geographic references. Fortification walls, houses, and pottery all date to the appropriate periods. Yet debate continues about whether this is actually ancient Arsine or another settlement in the same general area. The evidence isn't quite as clear-cut as one would hope. No inscription has been found definitively naming the site. The fit with ancient descriptions is good, but not perfect. Other nearby locations might potentially match the ancient accounts equally well. This uncertainty illustrates a fundamental problem in Greek archaeology. Even when you find an impressive ancient site in approximately the right location, proving it's the specific place mentioned in ancient texts can be surprisingly difficult. Unless you discover an inscription or coins or some other artifact that explicitly identifies the place, you're left arguing based on approximate matches of geography, chronology, and archaeological character. Such arguments can be persuasive, but rarely achieve certainty. Other Homeric sites are more problematic still. He mentions Orneae, described as a place of good horses, somewhere in the Argolid. The epithet suggests fertile pasture land, which narrows potential locations somewhat, but not enough. No site with that name has been convincingly identified. Ancient commentators disagreed about its location even in their own time, centuries closer to Homer than we are. Modern archaeologists have several possibilities but no certainty. Multiple sites in the appropriate region show Bronze Age occupation, but which, if any, was Orneae remains unknown. Erythyria, listed among Agamemnon's domains in the catalogue of ships, is similarly elusive. Ancient authorities placed it in various locations within the Argolid, sometimes with confidence, sometimes with equivocation. Strabo mentions it but seems uncertain about its exact position. Later geographers repeat earlier information without adding clarity. Modern surveys have identified numerous Bronze Age sites in the areas where Erythyria might have been, but none can be identified with confidence as this particular place. Part of the difficulty is that the Bronze Age landscape of the Argolid was much more densely settled than later periods. Systematic archaeological surveys, teams of researchers walking systematically across the landscape, recording every artifact and feature they encounter, have revealed hundreds of sites dating to the Mycenaean period. Far more than are named in any ancient text. Most were probably small farming villages or seasonal camps, places where agricultural workers lived during planting and harvest seasons, or where shepherds stayed while tending flocks in upland pastures. Such places wouldn't have been famous enough to be remembered in literature or legend. They existed, they were part of the Mycenaean world, but they were never named in any source that survived. But some were surely significant settlements that for whatever reason weren't prominent enough to be mentioned in the limited corpus of ancient texts that have come down to us. Homer names some cities and not others. His selection criteria, whatever they were, privileged certain places over others. We don't know how comprehensive his catalogue was meant to be, or what information he was working from. Later geographers had their own priorities and limitations. Pausanias, remarkably thorough though he was, could not visit every site in Greece. He focused on places that were still significant in his time, or that had interesting myths attached to them, or that possessed noteworthy art and architecture. Smaller settlements, those that had declined or been abandoned before his time, might not have warranted his attention. When archaeologists excavate an unnamed Mycenaean site, they face a peculiar challenge. They can determine its size, analyze its pottery to establish when it was occupied, study its architecture to understand its character and prosperity, examine burials to learn about social organization and wealth distribution, analyze plant and animal remains to reconstruct economy and diet. They can build a detailed picture of the community that lived there. But unless they find an inscription or some other explicit identifier, a seal bearing the city's name, a boundary marker, a religious dedication, they cannot name it. They cannot know whether this was one of the places mentioned in ancient sources or one of the many settlements that existed but were never recorded. This becomes particularly frustrating in cases where a site is obviously important. Rich burials suggesting aristocratic or even royal occupation. Sophisticated architecture showing skilled construction and substantial resources. Evidence of administrative activity, perhaps even fragments of linear B tablets, suggesting a place significant enough to maintain written records. Such sites must have had names, must have been known to their contemporaries, must have played roles in regional politics and economics. Yet, the names are lost, the connection to ancient texts severed by time and the vagaries of historical preservation. The Argolid also preserves traditions about cities that were deliberately destroyed and abandoned, not by natural disaster, not by gradual economic decline, but by conquest and policy. Ancient Greek warfare sometimes resulted in the total elimination of defeated cities. This was not the norm. Warfare often aimed at political submission or economic advantage rather than complete destruction, but it happened often enough to shape the archaeological landscape. Populations were killed, enslaved, or forcibly relocated. Buildings were razed to their foundations. Walls were pulled down stone by stone. Fields were left fallow or redistributed to the victors. The site itself was meant to cease to exist, to be erased from the political map as punishment, as warning, or as strategic necessity. Mycenae itself suffered this fate. After the Persian Wars, tensions between Mycenae and neighboring Argos erupted into conflict. By this period, the 5th century BC, Mycenae was no longer the mighty citadel of Bronze Age legend. Its power had faded, its territory shrunk, but it remained a distinct polis with its own identity and interests, and those interests increasingly conflicted with those of Argos, which was expanding its control over the entire Argolid plain. Argos, by then the dominant power in the region, captured and destroyed Mycenae around 468 BC. The classical era settlement was razed. The inhabitants were killed or forced to flee. The site was abandoned for centuries. When Pausanias visited in the 2nd century AD, nearly 600 years after the destruction, he saw impressive ruins, but no living city. The Cyclopean walls still stood, too massive to have been easily demolished. The Lion Gate remained, though other structures had collapsed or been cannibalized for building stone. Pausanias could still identify the treasury of Atreus and other monuments. But the city itself was dead, preserved only as a ruin, a tourist curiosity for Roman-era travelers curious about the legendary past. Only in modern times has the site been reoccupied, not as a city, but as an archaeological park and tourist destination. The village of Mycenae nearby takes its name from the ancient site, but is not a continuation of it. The ancient city's destruction in 468 BC marked a true end to its urban life. For archaeologists searching for lost cities in the Argolid, Mycenae serves as both an example and a warning. Even a place as famous as Mycenae, a city central to Greek mythology and culture, could be thoroughly destroyed and abandoned. If it had been less famous, if later writers had not preserved its memory, if its ruins had been less impressive, it might have become truly lost, reduced to a name in ancient texts with no known location on any map. Other cities destroyed by Argos during its period of expansion might have been even more thoroughly erased. If the victors not only destroyed buildings but scattered the stones, deliberately filled in foundations to obliterate any trace of settlement, and actively tried to eliminate evidence of the defeated city's existence, then locating such sites becomes extremely difficult. Without standing walls or visible ruins to attract attention, surface survey might reveal nothing diagnostic. Only chance discovery during construction work or systematic excavation across large areas driven by some other research question might reveal the buried remains. The sheer number of possibilities compounds the search difficulty. The Argolid, though not an enormous region, contains many square kilometers of land that could potentially hide ancient settlements. Plains, foothills, coastal zones, river valleys. Without clear guidance from ancient sources about where to search, archaeologists must make strategic choices about where to focus limited resources. They can't excavate everywhere. They must target their efforts based on probability and opportunity. There's also the problem of coastal change, a significant factor in a region that has always depended on maritime connections. The Argolid coast has shifted substantially over millennia. Rivers draining from the mountains have deposited sediment, extending the land into the sea. Natural harbors have gradually filled with silt, becoming marshy lagoons and eventually dry land. Beaches have grown or eroded depending on complex interactions between geology, sea level, and human activity. Earthquakes, common in this seismically active region, have caused localized subsidence or uplift, changing the relationship between land and sea. A city described as coastal in Bronze Age sources might now be inland, perhaps significantly inland, its port filled with sediment, its relationship to the sea fundamentally altered. The harbor installations, the warehouses and workshops that would have clustered near the shore, might now be buried beneath fields a kilometer from the water. Archaeologists searching for a harbor town based on ancient descriptions might walk right past its remains without recognizing them, if those remains are now surrounded by agricultural land with no obvious connection to the coast. Conversely, some coastal sites might now be underwater or in the intertidal zone. If sea levels have risen, if tectonic activity has caused subsidence, if coastal erosion has been particularly severe, then portions of ancient settlements might have been lost entirely to the sea. Underwater archaeology in the shallow waters along the Argolid coast has revealed ancient remains in several locations, but systematic survey is expensive and technically challenging. Many areas have never been properly investigated. The small size of some settlements compounds the difficulty dramatically. Not every city mentioned in ancient texts was large by modern standards, or even by ancient standards. The Greek word polis is often translated as city, but it really meant something closer to political community or city-state. A polis could be quite small. Some Mycenaean centers might have had populations of only a few hundred to perhaps 1,000 inhabitants. Their archaeological footprint would be proportionally modest. Stone robbing, a practice that continued for millennia after a site's abandonment, systematically removed building materials from ancient sites for reuse in later construction. Byzantine churches, Ottoman buildings, modern houses, all were often built with stones quarried from nearby ancient ruins. This was practical and economical. Why cut new stone when perfectly good blocks already existed, shaped and ready for use? But from an archaeological perspective, stone robbing is devastating. It removes diagnostic architectural elements, scatters materials across the landscape, and can reduce substantial buildings to ground-level foundations, or even completely eliminate them. Agricultural ploughing has been equally destructive in its own way. For centuries, perhaps millennia, farmers have ploughed fields that once contained ancient settlements. Each pass of the plough brings stones to the surface, breaks pottery into ever smaller fragments, redistributes materials across the field. Over many generations of ploughing, the archaeological signature of a site can be so diffused and degraded that it becomes unrecognizable. Surface survey might find scattered pottery sherds and occasional stones, but without concentrated deposits or clear patterns, surveyors might not realize they're looking at the remains of a once substantial community. Natural erosion, particularly severe on hillsides and slopes, gradually removes soil and the artifacts it contains. Water flowing downhill during storms carries materials away from their original positions. Wind erosion, particularly in exposed locations, can have similar effects. Over centuries, a settlement on a hilltop might lose much of its archaeological deposits to erosion, while a settlement in a valley might be buried under alluvium carried from upslope. The result is that sites in different topographic positions preserve differently and have different visibility in archaeological survey. Vegetation growth, especially of deep-rooted trees and shrubs, can disturb archaeological deposits as roots penetrate and displace materials. When trees fall, either naturally or through logging, they bring up substantial amounts of soil and anything it contains, mixing layers and scattering artifacts. Dense vegetation also makes survey difficult or impossible, as surveyors cannot see the ground surface well enough to identify artifacts or features. Modern research in the Argolid has benefited from increasingly sophisticated approaches that attempt to overcome these challenges. Total landscape survey projects, where large teams work systematically to record everything visible across extensive regions, have dramatically expanded knowledge of ancient settlement patterns. These surveys don't focus on finding already known major sites. Instead, they document every artifact scatter, every architectural fragment, every subtle topographic feature that might indicate human activity. The result is a comprehensive picture of how people used the entire landscape in different periods, not just where the major centers were located. Such surveys have revealed that the Mycenaean Argolid was far more densely occupied than anyone previously imagined. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of small sites, most previously unknown, have been documented. Many are modest farmsteads or agricultural installations, the quotidian remains of people farming the land and herding animals. But among them are surely some more substantial settlements, places that were villages or small towns rather than simple farms. Distinguishing these from the background noise of smaller sites requires careful analysis of artifact densities, architectural remains, and other indicators of site size and importance. Geophysical prospection, using technologies like magnetometry, electrical resistivity, and ground-penetrating radar, offers ways to detect buried structures without excavation. These methods have been applied successfully at various Argolid sites, revealing building plans, fortification systems, and other features that aren't visible on the surface. Magnetometry is particularly effective at finding fired materials like kilns or hearths, which show up as strong magnetic anomalies. Resistivity surveys can detect stone walls and floors, which conduct electricity differently than surrounding soil. Ground-penetrating radar can map the depth and configuration of buried structures. But these technologies have limitations. They work best in certain soil conditions. Clay-rich soils can be problematic for GPR. Rocky terrain creates noise in magnetometry surveys. Each technique has optimal applications and conditions where it works poorly. More fundamentally, geophysical survey requires knowing approximately where to look. You can't geophysically survey the entire Argolid. It would take many lifetimes and cost astronomical sums. Geophysics is usually applied to specific sites or areas identified as promising through other means, testing hypotheses and expanding knowledge of places already known to be archaeologically significant. Analysis of ancient agricultural terracing and field systems provides another avenue for understanding settlement patterns. Mycenaean farmers modified the landscape, building terraces on slopes to create level planting surfaces and prevent erosion. These terraces, when preserved, can still be detected through careful topographic study. Their distribution and character provide information about how intensively different areas were farmed, which in turn suggests where farming communities were located. Dense terrace systems require nearby labor to build and maintain them, implying settlements close at hand. Studies of water sources offer yet another approach. Bronze Age settlements needed reliable water for drinking, cooking, washing, and often for craft activities. Springs, streams, and wells determined where people could live. Identifying ancient water sources, some of which may have dried up or changed location over millennia, helps constrain possible settlement locations. If a place mentioned in ancient texts was described as having good water, modern hydrological study of the area might identify likely spots where springs would have existed in antiquity. These multiple approaches, landscape survey, geophysics, terrace analysis, hydrological study, plus traditional excavation and study of ancient texts, are all being integrated in ongoing research. Modern Argolid archaeology is collaborative and multidisciplinary, bringing together specialists in different fields to tackle questions that no single method can answer. The hope is that through this comprehensive approach, some of the missing cities named in ancient sources will finally be located and identified. Some might be the missing cities from ancient lists, the places that Homer, Strabo, and Pausanias described, but that we have not yet connected to physical remains. Others might be places never mentioned in any surviving text at all, communities known to their inhabitants and neighbors, but not famous enough, not connected enough to major events, not interesting enough to ancient writers to warrant mention in works that happened to survive to our time. Either way, they represent pieces of the puzzle still missing from our reconstruction of Bronze Age and classical Greece, gaps in our understanding of how people lived, how communities developed, how the ancient landscape was organized and used. The ongoing excavations and surveys in the Argolid continue to surprise researchers with new discoveries. In recent decades, extensive areas outside the citadel of Mycenae have been investigated, revealing a far larger settlement than anyone previously suspected. The lower town, protected by outer fortification walls that archaeologists are still mapping, housed thousands of people during the city's heyday. Workshops, houses, streets, all are gradually being revealed through patient excavation. This discovery has fundamentally changed understanding of Mycenaean urbanization, demonstrating that at least the major centers were genuine cities with substantial populations and complex urban layouts, not just fortified citadels ruling rural territories. Similar discoveries at Tiryns and other sites continue to reshape pictures of Mycenaean society. Each new excavation season brings artifacts and architectural features that refine or revise previous understanding. Each analysis of pottery or scientific dating of materials adds precision to chronologies. Each decipherment of linear B tablet fragments provides additional details about administration, economy, and society. The cumulative effect of this ongoing research is a constantly evolving picture of the Mycenaean world, richer and more complex than earlier generations of scholars imagined. Yet despite all this progress, fundamental questions remain. Where are the other cities that ancient sources describe? Why have some proved so difficult to locate? Are they genuinely missing, destroyed beyond recognition, or buried beyond reach? Or are they hiding in plain sight, already discovered but not yet identified, recorded in archaeological reports as generic Bronze Age sites without being connected to the specific names in ancient texts? The answers to these questions will shape future research directions and may only emerge through continued patient work and perhaps fortunate discoveries. Religious sanctuaries in ancient Greece did not always develop inside existing cities. Some of the most important sacred sites were located in relatively remote areas, deliberately positioned in wild or liminal spaces that enhanced their spiritual significance. These sanctuaries attracted pilgrims from across the Greek world. They accumulated offerings, treasures, monumental architecture. In many cases, settlements grew up around them to serve the needs of visitors and maintain the sanctuary itself. Ancient sources describe such sanctuary towns in various locations, places that existed primarily to serve a nearby religious site. Communities whose economy, identity, and purpose were bound up with maintaining temples and accommodating pilgrims. Yet some of these places, clearly described in ancient texts, cannot be found today. Consider the sanctuary of Apollo at Basae, high in the mountains of Arcadia. The temple itself still stands, one of the best preserved classical temples in Greece. Its remote location, difficult terrain, and solid construction helped it survive when more accessible sites were quarried for building stone. But ancient sources mention a town nearby, inhabited by people who served the sanctuary and guided pilgrims through the dangerous mountain paths. Where was this town? No substantial settlement has been found in the immediate vicinity of the temple. Perhaps it was small, its remains eroded or buried. Perhaps it was located further away than ancient writers implied. Or perhaps, like many mountain communities in Greece, it moved over time, following resources or responding to dangers, leaving minimal archaeological trace. More puzzling are cases where both the sanctuary and its associated town have vanished. Ancient writers describe religious sites that attracted regional or even pan-Hellenic attention, that held festivals and games, that possessed famous statues or oracles. These were not obscure rural shrines, but significant cult centers. Yet archaeologists cannot locate them with confidence. Part of the problem is that ancient religious geography was complex and sometimes deliberately obscure. Sacred sites were not always marked prominently. Some were intentionally hidden, their locations known to initiates but kept secret from outsiders. Mystery cults, in particular, often maintained sanctuaries in concealed locations, revealing them only to those who had been properly initiated. After Christianity became dominant and such cults were suppressed, the location of their sanctuaries might have been quickly forgotten. Even non-secret sanctuaries could become lost if they were abandoned and not mentioned in later texts. A cult center important in the archaic or classical period might have declined by the time Roman-era geographers were writing. If such writers didn't visit the site personally and had no reason to record it, its location might drop out of the historical record, despite having been prominent for centuries. Natural disasters pose another explanation. Greece is seismically active. Earthquakes have destroyed countless buildings over millennia. A sanctuary in a vulnerable location, especially one built on hillsides or near unstable slopes, might have been completely demolished by a major quake. If the destruction was severe enough and occurred when the sanctuary was already in decline, the community might have abandoned the site rather than rebuilding. The ruins would then be subject to normal processes of erosion and vegetation growth, potentially becoming unrecognizable within a few generations. Sacred trees and groves present a particularly frustrating category. Many Greek sanctuaries were not primarily architectural. The sacred site was defined by a natural feature, typically a grove of trees, a spring, or an unusual rock formation. Temple buildings, if they existed at all, might have been small and impermanent. The holiness resided in the landscape feature, not in any human construction. Ancient sources mention numerous such natural sanctuaries, sometimes describing them in detail. Pausanias, for instance, mentions many sacred groves, each associated with a particular deity, and often with specific trees that had religious significance. These groves had names, traditions, and roles in local religious life, but natural features can disappear. Trees die, are cut down, burn in wildfires. Springs dry up or change location. Rock formations collapse in earthquakes or are quarried away. A sacred grove that was a recognizable landmark in antiquity might have vanished centuries ago, leaving no trace that modern archaeologists could identify as a religious site. The situation is even more complex with sanctuaries that were deliberately destroyed during periods of religious conflict. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, pagan temples were often converted, demolished, or abandoned. Some destruction was systematic and thorough, designed to eliminate paganism by erasing its physical centers. A sanctuary destroyed in this way, its stones carried off to build churches, its statues broken and buried, its sacred objects confiscated or destroyed, might leave very limited archaeological evidence. Some of the most important missing sanctuaries are those described in connection with mystery religions. The Eleusinian mysteries, centered at Eleusis near Athens, are well known because Eleusis has been extensively excavated. But ancient sources mention other mystery cults at other locations, some with significant followings and regional importance. The mysteries of the Kabiroi, for instance, were practiced at several sites, but not all of those sites have been confidently identified. These mysteries involved secret rituals and teachings, revealed only to initiates. The locations of lesser-known mystery sanctuaries might have been kept deliberately obscure, even in antiquity, known to participants but not widely publicized. If such a sanctuary was then abandoned or destroyed, and if its location was not recorded in texts that happened to survive, it could vanish from knowledge completely. Archaeological detection of sacred sites requires recognizing particular kinds of evidence. Votive offerings, the small objects pilgrims left as gifts to deities. Ritual pottery types, bones from animal sacrifices, architectural elements from temple buildings. But not all sanctuaries left such evidence, or left it in concentrations recognizable during survey. Small rural shrines might have received offerings of perishable materials, flowers, bread, simple pottery that has not survived. Natural sanctuaries with minimal architecture might show few diagnostic features distinguishing them from ordinary habitation sites. The religious geography of ancient Greece was far denser than can be reconstructed from archaeology alone. Every city, every town, every village had its local cults and sacred places. The major pan-Hellenic sanctuaries, places like Delphi, Olympia, and Delos, are well documented and excavated. But the hundreds or thousands of smaller sacred sites that served local communities and regional cults represent a massive gap in archaeological knowledge. Many are simply unknown. Others are mentioned in ancient texts, but cannot be located. The Peloponnesian War fought between Athens and Sparta from 431 to 404 BC was one of the most destructive conflicts in Greek history. It involved most of the Greek world, directly or indirectly, and resulted in enormous casualties, economic devastation, and political transformation. It also resulted in the destruction of numerous cities, some of which were never rebuilt. Thucydides, the great historian of this war, mentions many cities affected by the conflict. Some were attacked and captured. Others were besieged. Some changed hands multiple times. A few were destroyed so thoroughly that their populations were killed or enslaved, and their buildings razed to the ground. For some of these cities, Thucydides provides the only historical record of their existence. Locating cities destroyed in war presents particular challenges. Unlike cities abandoned gradually due to economic decline, where buildings remain standing and material culture accumulates slowly, cities destroyed by violence often show dramatic evidence of destruction, but then may have been deliberately cleared. Victorious armies sometimes wanted to eliminate not just the military threat, but the memory of the defeated. They would demolish fortifications, tear down temples, scatter building stones, and forbid reoccupation. Such thorough destruction can actually make a site harder to find. There are no standing walls to attract attention. Surface survey might reveal only scattered pottery and stone fragments, indistinguishable from many other small rural sites. Without systematic excavation, and without some reason to suspect a particular location was a significant city, the remains might never be recognized for what they are. Several cities mentioned by Thucydides in connection with the Peloponnesian War have proven difficult to locate. Places that he describes as substantial, fortified, politically significant, that played roles in specific campaigns. Ancient commentators sometimes preserved traditions about their locations, but modern attempts to identify these sites have often been inconclusive. There are several reasons why cities destroyed in this war might be particularly elusive. First, many were in regions that saw extensive later activity. The Peloponnese and other areas of Greek warfare were continuously inhabited. New settlements, agriculture, road building, and other development over 2,400 years have layered over, disturbed, or obliterated evidence of earlier occupation. Second, the war created population movements that confused later geographers. Survivors from destroyed cities might relocate, sometimes taking their city's name with them, sometimes founding new settlements elsewhere. Later writers, knowing a city named X existed but not knowing it had moved, might describe it in the wrong location. Or they might be describing the new settlement without realizing it was different from the older one mentioned in wartime accounts. Third, the trauma of the war itself affected historical memory. Cities that suffered terribly might have wanted to forget that suffering, rather than preserve detailed records of where specific events occurred. Later generations removed from the conflict might remember that their ancestors' city was destroyed, but be unclear about exactly where it had been or what it was called. Some coastal cities affected by the war have additional complications. Naval warfare was crucial to the conflict. Many cities were ports or had access to the sea. The coastline has changed substantially since antiquity. Sea level fluctuations, sediment deposition, tectonic movements, all have altered where land meets water. A port city described by Thucydides might now be underwater, or might be inland, or might have had its harbour filled with sediment and rendered unrecognizable. Archaeological survey in regions that saw heavy fighting during the Peloponnesian War has identified numerous ancient sites, many previously unknown. But connecting these sites to specific names from ancient sources remains difficult. Most lack the inscriptions or other explicit identifiers needed for certain identification. A fortified site showing signs of violent destruction in the late 5th century BC might be one of Thucydides' lost cities. Or it might be a different place, not prominent enough to be mentioned in literature, but nonetheless involved in the conflict. The war also affected memory and record-keeping in more subtle ways. The conflict disrupted normal political and cultural life throughout Greece for decades. Educational institutions declined. Artistic and literary production decreased. The generation that experienced the war firsthand suffered tremendous losses. When peace finally came, enormous effort went into rebuilding and recovery. Documentation of what had been lost may not have been a priority. By the time later geographers like Strabo and Pausanias were traveling and writing, centuries had passed. They noted ruins they saw and repeated traditions they heard, but they were working with incomplete and sometimes contradictory information. If a city destroyed in the Peloponnesian War had not been rebuilt, if its name had been forgotten locally, if traditions about it had not been preserved, then it might not appear in their accounts at all. The result is a frustrating gap in the archaeological record. We know from Thucydides that many cities participated in the Peloponnesian War. We know some were destroyed, but for a number of these places, we cannot find them. They exist in the historical record, but not on any map. They were important enough to be mentioned in one of the ancient world's greatest historical works, but not important enough, or not lucky enough, to leave traces we can recognize today. Modern research continues to search for these ghost cities. Archaeological projects in the Peloponnese and other areas affected by the war work to identify ancient sites and connect them to historical names. New survey techniques, particularly satellite-based remote sensing, offer hope for finding settlements that conventional methods missed. Every inscription discovered, every coin found, every architectural detail analyzed might provide the clue needed to identify a previously unknown or misidentified site. But the war happened long ago, and time has not been gentle with its ruins. For some cities destroyed in that conflict, the Peloponnesian War may have been a double death. First, the physical destruction. Then the slow erasure of memory and evidence, until even their names became uncertain, their locations disputed, their very existence reduced to lines in an ancient text. The Aegean Sea is dotted with hundreds of islands, large and small. Ancient sources describe many settlements on these islands, some of which have been found and excavated, others of which remain mysterious. But there's an even stranger category in the ancient geographical record: islands themselves that cannot be found. Several ancient writers mention islands that, according to modern surveys, do not exist. Not sunken islands, which we'll discuss, but islands that apparently never existed at all, or existed differently than described. These present a peculiar challenge. How do we search for a place that geography says shouldn't be there? Some cases have clear explanations. Ancient geographers sometimes made errors. They might describe the same island twice under different names, not realizing it was the same place. They might locate an island incorrectly, placing it in one part of the sea when it actually existed somewhere else. They might confuse written descriptions, copying information inaccurately, or misunderstanding what earlier sources meant. But other cases are harder to dismiss. Careful observers, including some who claim to have visited certain islands, describe places that sound specific and real. They give details about the island's size, its inhabitants, its products, its position relative to other known locations. Yet modern surveys find nothing at those coordinates. The island, if it existed, has vanished. One possibility is subsidence. Islands can sink, particularly in seismically active regions like the Aegean. Volcanic activity, earthquakes, and tectonic shifts can cause land to subside below sea level. If an island mentioned in ancient sources has sunk, it might now be an underwater seamount, visible only with sonar or underwater survey equipment. Ancient sources do describe islands that sank. The island of Chrysae, for instance, is mentioned by several writers who claim it was swallowed by the sea. Modern underwater surveys have identified a submerged plateau in the approximate area where ancient sources placed Chrysa, suggesting this could potentially be the remains of the missing island. However, the evidence remains inconclusive. The underwater feature might represent an island that sank during historical times, matching the ancient accounts. Alternatively, it could be a geological formation that was always underwater, meaning either that Chryse was located elsewhere entirely, that it was misidentified by ancient writers, or that it may not have existed as described. Without diagnostic artifacts or inscriptions from the underwater site, definitively connecting it to the literary references remains problematic. Another explanation involves changes in sea level. During glacial periods, sea levels were significantly lower than today. Coastlines extended much further out, and shallow areas that are now underwater were dry land. Some islands that existed when sea levels were lower would have been submerged as glaciers melted and seas rose. If ancient geographers were recording very old traditions, preserving geographic knowledge from earlier periods, they might have described islands that existed in the distant past, but were already gone by historical times. This possibility is tantalizing but difficult to prove. Ancient Greek geography was generally contemporary, describing the world as it existed when the writers lived. If they mentioned vanished islands, we would expect them to note that the islands had sunk, or that they were repeating old traditions. Most don't make such distinctions. They describe islands as though they existed in their time. There's also the problem of exaggeration and fantasy. Ancient literature was not always strictly factual. Travel accounts sometimes included invented details to make stories more interesting. Geographers sometimes repeated information they had not personally verified. Islands mentioned in romantic or fantastical contexts might have been partly or wholly fictional. Distinguishing between real but vanished islands and fictional islands requires careful analysis of the ancient sources. Writers considered generally reliable, who provide specific details and cross-references to other known locations, are more credible than writers known for embellishment. Islands mentioned by multiple independent sources are more likely to be real than those appearing in only one text. But even with careful analysis, certainty is often impossible. Some mysterious islands in ancient sources have been tentatively identified with known but obscure places. An island described in one location might actually be an island somewhere else, mispositioned due to errors in ancient navigation or map-making. Ancient maps were not precise by modern standards. Latitude and longitude were estimated, distances were often wrong, and the shapes of coastlines were distorted. An island described as being a certain distance from a particular harbor might actually be that same distance, but in a different direction. Modern archaeological surveys of Aegean islands continue to discover new sites and revise understanding of ancient settlement patterns. Some islands thought to be insignificant in antiquity turn out to have substantial ruins. Others, assumed to be major centers, have less evidence than expected. Each new discovery has the potential to solve one of these ancient geographical puzzles. But the Aegean is large, and many small islands and islets remain incompletely surveyed. A small island mentioned in ancient sources might be one of dozens of rocky outcrops that haven't received detailed archaeological attention. Or it might have been so thoroughly eroded by waves and weather that little remains of any ancient settlement that once existed there. There's also the possibility that some mysterious islands were sandbanks or temporary features rather than permanent land. The Aegean contains areas of shallow water where sediment accumulates. Sandbars and small temporary islands can form and then wash away during storms. If an ancient ship captain happened to land on such a temporary feature and reported its location, later sailors seeking it would find only open water. These ephemeral islands couldn't support permanent settlement, but they might have been mentioned in sailing directions or geographic catalogues. Without recognizing that they were temporary rather than permanent features, later writers might have treated them as stable islands, creating confusion when they couldn't be found. The search for ancient islands faces unique challenges compared to searching for cities on the mainland. Underwater archaeology is expensive and technically demanding. Most of the Aegean seabed has never been systematically surveyed. A sunken island might be found by chance, detected by ships conducting other kinds of research, but dedicated searches are rare because funding is limited and the potential search area is enormous. For islands that might have been misidentified or misdescribed rather than sunk, the challenge is different, but equally difficult. How do you prove that an anonymous small island is the one mentioned in an ancient text? Unless you find an inscription or some other explicit identifier, you can only argue based on approximate matches of location, size, and description. Such arguments are rarely conclusive. So the mystery of the vanished islands continues. Ancient texts describe them, sometimes in considerable detail. Modern researchers cannot find them or are unsure which real islands correspond to which ancient descriptions. The Aegean keeps its secrets, and under its waves, there might be lost islands waiting to be rediscovered. The search for Greece's missing cities has been transformed by technology developed in recent decades. Methods that would have seemed like science fiction to earlier generations of archaeologists are now standard tools of the trade. Yet, even with these advances, many ancient cities remain elusive, their locations still unknown despite intensive searching. The gap between what technology makes possible and what practical constraints allow remains frustratingly large. LiDAR technology has proven particularly revolutionary. Light detection and ranging uses laser pulses transmitted from aircraft or drones to measure topography with extraordinary precision, creating detailed three-dimensional maps of the ground surface that can reveal subtle features invisible to normal observation. When flown over a landscape, LiDAR can penetrate vegetation canopy to some degree, particularly in winter when deciduous trees have lost their leaves, and create detailed elevation models showing variations of just a few centimeters. Features invisible to observers walking the ground suddenly appear in these data. Subtle variations in elevation that mark ancient walls, roads, building foundations, terracing systems. LiDAR has led to spectacular discoveries in heavily forested regions around the world. Ancient cities hidden for centuries under jungle canopy in Central America have been revealed, their layouts mapped without cutting a single tree. Entire previously unknown civilizations have been documented through LiDAR survey. In Greece, where vegetation is less dense, but ancient sites are often covered by scrub and olive groves, LiDAR has helped identify previously unknown settlements and clarify the extent of known ones. Fortification systems that appeared as discontinuous fragments in ground survey connect into coherent defensive networks when mapped from the air. Road systems that were partially visible become complete networks. Settlement patterns emerge from what seemed like random distributions of artifacts. But LiDAR has limitations that researchers must constantly navigate. It sees the surface, not what lies beneath. If a site is buried under substantial deposits of soil, if ancient remains are meters below the modern ground level, LiDAR won't detect them. This is precisely the situation at many potentially significant sites. Centuries or millennia of sediment accumulation, the result of erosion from upslope, flooding from rivers, wind-blown deposits, and gradual soil formation processes, have buried ancient cities meters underground. Their street plans and building foundations exist, preserved in the earth, but they're invisible from the surface, hidden beneath fields and forests. In such cases, even the most sophisticated aerial survey will reveal nothing. The ancient city leaves no surface signature, no topographic variation, nothing for LiDAR to detect. Ground-penetrating techniques become necessary, but these face their own challenges. Ground-penetrating radar offers a complementary technology for investigating what lies beneath the surface. GPR sends electromagnetic pulses into the ground and measures the reflections that bounce back. Different materials, different densities, variations in moisture content, all produce different reflection patterns. Skilled interpreters can use GPR data to map buried structures, identify walls and floors, detect large objects like storage vessels or tombs, distinguish architectural features from natural geological formations. GPR has been used successfully at many Greek archaeological sites. It's non-invasive, leaving the ground undisturbed while revealing what lies beneath. This makes it particularly valuable at protected sites where excavation is restricted for preservation reasons, or in areas where modern development makes digging impractical or impossible. In urban areas where ancient sites lie beneath modern cities, GPR can investigate without disrupting current buildings and infrastructure. At sensitive monuments where excavation might destabilize structures, GPR can map surrounding areas without risk. But GPR also has significant limitations that affect its applications. It works best in certain soil conditions. Sandy, gravelly soils with low clay content allow radar signals to penetrate deeply, sometimes several meters. Clay-rich soils, particularly when wet, absorb radar signals and reduce penetration depth dramatically, sometimes to just half a meter or less. This means GPR effectiveness varies enormously depending on local geology. Rocky terrain scatters signals and makes interpretation difficult. Buried metal objects, modern utilities, irrigation pipes, all create strong reflections that can mask or confuse the archaeological signal. And GPR requires extensive, methodical work. It's not a magic wand that instantly reveals buried cities. Survey must be conducted systematically, walking transects across the area of interest, maintaining precise positioning so data can be properly georeferenced and assembled into coherent maps. A single hectare might require days of fieldwork to survey properly. For large sites, or when searching across extensive areas for unknown settlements, the time and cost become prohibitive. GPR is typically used to investigate specific locations already identified as promising through other means, testing hypotheses about what might lie buried in particular spots. Magnetometry and electrical resistivity survey represent other geophysical techniques now commonly employed in archaeological prospection, each with their own strengths and optimal applications. Magnetometry detects variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried features. Ancient walls, particularly if they've been heated in fires, create magnetic anomalies. Kilns, pottery workshops, metalworking areas show up strongly in magnetic surveys. Even compacted paths and beaten earth floors can sometimes be detected. Resistivity measures how easily electrical current passes through the ground, with buried architecture typically showing different resistivity than surrounding soil. Stone walls and floors, being denser than soil, usually show higher resistivity. Ditches and pits filled with loose soil show lower resistivity. These techniques work well for certain kinds of remains and certain soil conditions. They're particularly effective at detecting burned structures, since heating can permanently alter the magnetic properties of clay and stone, creating strong anomalies that remain detectable millennia later. They can identify concentrations of pottery, which has different properties than natural soil. They help archaeologists decide where to excavate by showing where interesting features are likely to be found, avoiding the need for random test pits or extensive area excavation to locate structures. But like all remote sensing methods, these techniques have practical limits that constrain their use. Large areas must be surveyed to locate small sites. If you're searching for a settlement of unknown location across, say, 10 square kilometers of countryside, you cannot magnetometry survey that entire area. It would take too long and cost too much. You must first narrow the search through other means: surface survey, analysis of ancient descriptions, study of topography and resources, then apply geophysics to test specific high-probability locations. The equipment requires relatively level, accessible ground. Steep slopes, dense vegetation, rocky outcrops all make survey difficult or impossible. Dense vegetation must be cleared before survey can proceed, which may require permissions and creates its own archaeological risks if roots and undergrowth are protecting buried remains. Metal fences, buried pipes and cables, electrical lines, power transformers all create interference that can completely mask the archaeological signal. In many rural areas of Greece, stone walls demarcate fields, and irrigation systems include buried pipes. These modern features create anomalies that must be distinguished from ancient ones, requiring experience and careful interpretation. And the results always require interpretation. An anomaly in a magnetometry survey might be an ancient wall, or it might be a modern drain pipe. A resistivity variation might indicate buried architecture, or it might be natural geological variation in bedrock depth. Only excavation can ultimately confirm interpretations. Geophysics narrows possibilities, guides excavation to promising areas, helps archaeologists work more efficiently. But it doesn't eliminate the need for excavation, and excavation remains expensive, slow, destructive by nature, and constrained by permissions and funding. Satellite imagery, including increasingly sophisticated multispectral and hyperspectral imaging, offers another powerful tool that has revolutionized how archaeologists search for sites across large areas. Different types of vegetation grow differently over buried structures. Plants above buried walls may be stressed by shallow soil depth and lack of moisture, showing differently in certain wavelengths of light than surrounding vegetation. Plants above buried pits and ditches may thrive from extra moisture and nutrients, again showing differently. Soil chemistry changes where organic-rich deposits exist, from middens, from animal pens, from long periods of human habitation. These chemical changes can affect vegetation even millennia later. Moisture patterns vary depending on subsurface features, with buried walls shedding water differently than surrounding soil, creating patterns visible in thermal or near-infrared imaging. Sophisticated satellite sensors can detect these subtle variations, allowing archaeologists to identify potential sites from space without ever visiting them on the ground. This capability has proven particularly valuable in regions where ground access is difficult or restricted, in politically sensitive areas, in war zones, in remote regions, without road access. Archaeologists can screen large areas quickly from their offices, identifying promising locations for ground truthing with more intensive survey or excavation. The technology has matured rapidly in recent years, with commercial satellites now providing imagery at resolutions and spectral ranges that were unavailable to civilian users a decade ago. But satellites cannot find deeply buried sites. They detect surface features and very shallow subsurface variation, typically no more than 1 meter or 2 deep. In areas with deep soil accumulation, with intensive modern land use that has mixed and homogenized upper soil layers, or with thick vegetation that blocks all view of the ground. Satellite imagery may reveal nothing even when significant archaeological remains exist below. The technique works best in arid environments with sparse vegetation, where ancient walls and features create clear patterns on the bare ground, visible from space. In wetter climates with denser vegetation, where grease falls, results are more variable and require more expert interpretation. The integration of multiple technologies offers the most promise for finding lost cities. A comprehensive approach might begin with analysis of satellite imagery to identify areas showing promising anomalies, unusual vegetation patterns, suspicious geometric shapes that suggest human modification of the landscape. Follow-up ground survey using traditional field-walking methods would target those areas to collect surface artifacts and provide chronological information, determining if anomalies correlate with ancient occupation. Geophysical survey using GPR, magnetometry, or resistivity would investigate specific spots identified as most promising, mapping subsurface features in detail. LiDAR might be employed to understand topography precisely and identify subtle features obscured by vegetation. Finally, carefully placed test excavations would confirm interpretations and recover material for detailed scientific analysis, radiocarbon dating, pottery analysis, study of architecture and artifacts in their archaeological context. Such integrated approaches have succeeded in locating and characterizing ancient sites that single methods would have missed. The combination of techniques provides redundancy, with multiple independent lines of evidence all pointing toward the same conclusion, and complementarity, with each method revealing different aspects of the buried site. But these comprehensive approaches are expensive, requiring specialized equipment, trained personnel with expertise in different methods, and substantial time. Archaeological projects must compete for limited funding from government agencies, private foundations, and academic institutions. Resources cannot be devoted to every potentially interesting location. Choices must be made about priorities. There's also the fundamental challenge of knowing where to search. Greece is not a large country by global standards, but it contains an enormous amount of territory that could potentially hide ancient cities. Mountains cover much of the landscape, with valleys between ranges and coastal plains along shores. Islands, hundreds of them, dot the surrounding seas. Systematic survey of all this land would require many decades and cost vast sums. Archaeologists must make strategic decisions about where to focus effort, guided by ancient texts, by geographic logic, by understanding of ancient patterns of settlement and land use, and sometimes simply by opportunity when construction projects or natural erosion expose archaeological remains. Ancient texts provide crucial clues, but they're not always reliable guides to specific locations. A city described as being near another place might be 5 miles away or 50. Directions like toward the sea or in the mountains cover large search areas that can't be investigated entirely. Distance measurements in ancient texts used different units than modern systems and were often rough estimates rather than precise measurements. Ancient travelers didn't have accurate maps or GPS. They described locations in relation to known landmarks and prominent features, many of which no longer exist or cannot be identified with certainty. Without more precise information than most ancient texts provide, finding a small buried site becomes genuinely like searching for a needle in a haystack. Even with modern technology, even with large teams of trained researchers, even with generous funding, the task can seem overwhelming. Luck plays a role. Many important discoveries have resulted from chance. Farmers ploughing fields occasionally turn up ancient artifacts, unusual concentrations of pottery or building stones that lead to investigation and excavation. Construction workers excavating foundations sometimes encounter ancient walls or burials. Shepherds exploring remote areas notice unusual stone configurations or pottery scatters that turn out to be archaeological sites. Flooding and erosion can expose buried remains that were invisible before. These chance discoveries have led to the identification of many important sites. The Palace of Nestor at Pylos was discovered partly through such serendipity. Bronze Age tombs in the Argolid were found by farmers. Entire settlements have been revealed by road construction or pipeline installation. But chance is unpredictable and random, not a systematic strategy for finding missing cities. Professional archaeology aims for methodical, replicable approaches that produce comprehensive results. Waiting for lucky breaks is not a research plan. There's also the sobering reality that some ancient cities might be permanently beyond our reach, lost in ways that no technology can overcome. Sites built on coastal areas that have subsided tectonically might now be so deep underwater that investigation is impractical with current capabilities. Underwater archaeology at depths of more than about 30 meters becomes technically complex and expensive. Beyond 50 meters, it requires specialized equipment and trained technical divers. If a lost city is 100 meters underwater, buried under meters of marine sediment, detecting and excavating it would require resources beyond what most projects can command. Such sites may have to wait for future technologies or future priorities that make their investigation feasible. Cities buried beneath modern towns and cities cannot be excavated without displacing current inhabitants, which is obviously not possible, except in very limited ways when construction projects create opportunities for salvage archaeology. Millions of people live in Greece, many in urban areas that have been continuously occupied since antiquity. Beneath their houses and streets and shops lie the remains of earlier cities: Byzantine, Roman, Classical, sometimes even Bronze Age. These remains are protected by law, but they cannot be systematically excavated while modern life continues above them. Only when buildings are demolished or when major construction projects dig deep, foundations do opportunities arise for archaeological investigation. And even then, the work must be done quickly, under difficult conditions, before construction proceeds. Many important remains are documented and then reburied, preserved in place under new construction, accessible only through the photographs and records made during brief windows of investigation. Places where erosion has been particularly severe, especially on steep slopes and unstable terrain, might have lost so much evidence that identification is impossible even if excavation were conducted. Buildings collapse down slopes. Their stones wash away in floods. Wind erosion carries away soil and the artifacts it contains. After centuries of such processes, a site might be reduced to scattered stones and pottery sherds spread across a hillside, indistinguishable from the many small sites created by other processes. The original layout, the concentrations of materials that would indicate particular activities, the stratigraphy that would allow reconstruction of the site's history, all might be destroyed beyond recovery. Climate change adds new urgency to archaeological work and new challenges to preservation. Rising sea levels threaten coastal sites, already in many cases at risk from erosion and storm damage. What remains accessible for study now might be submerged or destroyed within a few decades. More extreme weather associated with changing climate brings increased erosion from heavier rainfall events. More severe droughts that allow vegetation to die back and expose sites to accelerated degradation. Stronger storms that damage exposed ruins. Changes in vegetation patterns alter how sites are preserved or degraded. Forest fires, more frequent in warming Mediterranean climates, can damage archaeological sites directly and remove protective vegetation that previously stabilized soil. Archaeologists increasingly recognize they're in a race against time, working to document and study sites before they're damaged or destroyed by environmental changes. This urgency affects research priorities and funding decisions. Sites at immediate risk receive attention before sites that seem more stable, even if the threatened sites are less significant historically. The need to respond to emerging threats competes with the desire to conduct methodical, carefully planned research projects. The balance is difficult to maintain, and not all choices are happy ones. On the positive side, technology continues to advance at a remarkable pace. New sensor types are being developed that can detect archaeological remains in ways not previously possible. Improved data processing, better integration of multiple data sources, application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyze satellite imagery and identify potential archaeological features automatically, all enhance prospection capabilities beyond what was imaginable even a few years ago. AI systems trained on thousands of images of known archaeological sites can scan vast amounts of satellite data, flagging anomalies and patterns that human observers might miss, working far faster than manual analysis. Crowdsourcing efforts engage volunteers in scanning images and marking potential features for expert review, distributing the enormous labor of searching across many contributors. Projects like this have successfully identified previously unknown sites in various parts of the world. The model could be applied more extensively in Greece, engaging public interest and scientific research simultaneously. Drone technology has made aerial photography and LiDAR survey much more accessible and affordable than when these techniques required full-size aircraft. Small drones carrying cameras and sensors can survey sites quickly and cheaply, providing high-resolution imagery and elevation data at a fraction of the cost of traditional aerial survey. This democratization of technology allows smaller projects and under-resourced regions to benefit from methods that were previously available only to well-funded expeditions. Machine learning applied to artifact analysis, allowing automatic classification of pottery and other materials, speeds laboratory work and enables large-scale comparative studies. Three-dimensional modeling and virtual reality create new ways to visualize and analyze sites, allowing researchers to explore virtual reconstructions of ancient places, testing hypotheses about how spaces were used and how architecture functioned. Digital archaeology, encompassing these and other computational methods, is transforming the field, creating possibilities that early archaeologists could never have imagined. Each technological advance brings the possibility of finding one of the long-lost cities described in ancient texts. Somewhere beneath the soil of Greece, in valleys and on hilltops, along coasts and inland, these places still exist. They haven't ceased to be. They've simply been hidden by time and circumstance, by erosion and burial, by destruction and rebuilding. by the normal processes that obscure the past. With persistence, careful research, integration of traditional and cutting-edge methods, and perhaps a measure of luck, more of them will be found. Each discovery, whether it solves an old mystery or creates new questions, adds to the intricate picture of ancient Greece, enriching understanding of how societies developed, how people lived, how communities related to their environments and to each other. But even with every technological advantage, even with unlimited funding and decades of work, some ancient cities might remain lost forever. They might be buried too deep for current methods to detect. They might have been destroyed too thoroughly to leave recognizable remains. They might be located in places that are practically inaccessible, under modern cities or deep underwater, or in terrain that cannot be safely investigated. Or they might be among the hundreds of sites already identified but not yet connected to specific names in ancient texts, documented as Bronze Age settlement near X, but not recognized as the city of Y that ancient writers described. The search continues, driven by curiosity about the past and the desire to understand how ancient societies developed and declined. Each discovery, whether it solves an old mystery or opens new questions, adds threads to the complex fabric of Greek history. And each missing city, still waiting to be found, represents a puzzle that future archaeologists, with better tools and deeper knowledge, might have the means to solve. The Earth keeps its secrets well, but patient investigation, aided by advancing technology and sustained by commitment to understanding the past, continues to coax those secrets into the light, one discovery at a time. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of Greece's forgotten cities intriguing, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more mysteries of the ancient world to explore, and your support helps make that possible. Until next time, good night.